A woman who learns to sit with herself in silence becomes the most unpredictable force in the room. This isn't because she intends to dominate, but because she no longer needs to. Silence in a noisy world is often misunderstood. It's mistaken for weakness. But there's a kind of silence that isn't born of suppression, but of strength. It's a silence that doesn't beg to be understood because it already understands itself. This silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of awareness. It's the stillness that comes after you stop trying to explain your worth. It's the peace that enters when you no longer react to every shift in another person's mood. It's the clarity that rises when your emotions are no longer dictated by what someone did or didn't say. Most women are trained to overexpress, to over-explain, to always give context to their boundaries, until they realize that silence itself is the boundary. When a woman turns inward, not out of fear, but out of choice, she activates a deeper form of respect. People feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they sense it. And when you begin focusing on yourself not in selfishness, but in stillness, everything misplaced starts falling back into place. When a woman begins to truly focus on herself, something profound begins to shift, not just inside her, but in the world around her. This isn't merely about self-care routines or momentary retreats from others. It's a deeper awakening, a quiet decision to stop pouring energy into places that no longer give back, to reclaim attention from everything external and redirect it inward. That shift, though subtle at first, transforms everything. It begins with a question. Where is my energy going? In a world that constantly demands a woman's attention, her nurturing, her care, her explanations, her compromises, it becomes easy to forget that energy isn't limitless. Attention is currency, and the way you spend it determines the quality of your emotional life. The more you give away without intention, the less you have for yourself. But the moment a woman begins to observe rather than react, to choose herself rather than chase others, she starts to experience a different kind of power, a power that doesn't come from trying to control others, but from mastering her inner space. Neuroscience has long confirmed this truth. What you focus on grows. This is called the Hebbian principle. Neurons that fire together wire together. When your mind is always busy trying to fix people, explain yourself, predict outcomes, or worry about how you're perceived, it strengthens patterns of anxiety and over-responsibility. But when you begin to bring your attention back to yourself, your breath, your thoughts, your values, your stillness, you start rewiring your brain for clarity, peace, and purpose. Take the story of Mina, a woman in her late 50s who had spent most of her adult life adjusting herself around others as a mother, a wife, and later as a caretaker for aging parents. She learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. But after her children moved out and her caregiving roles ended, she was left with silence. At first, it was terrifying. The noise of other people's needs had been her compass for so long that she didn't know how to navigate without it. But slowly she began to ask, what do I feel when no one is watching? What do I want when I'm not needed? She started small morning walks without her phone, journaling, without editing herself, saying no, without guilt. And as her attention returned to herself, something powerful emerged. She no longer felt pulled in 20 directions. Her conversations became more intentional. She no longer responded to emotional manipulation with explanations, just calm silence. And to her surprise, people began to treat her differently, not because she demanded respect, but because she radiated it from within. Focusing on yourself isn't abandonment of others, it's anchoring within yourself so you don't get lost in others. You begin to recognize your patterns where you overextend, where you seek validation, where you betray your intuition. To maintain peace, each time you notice yourself interrupting the automatic cycle, that moment of noticing is power. It's awareness becoming action. There's a sacred discipline in remembering yourself before you remember others. It requires asking before every yes, whether it's rooted in fear or integrity. It means pausing before reacting to ask, is this worth my energy? Does this reflect who I am becoming? It's not easy, especially for women who've been conditioned to associate their worth with service, silence, with weakness, and boundaries with rejection. But the truth is the opposite. The woman who focuses on herself isn't selfish, she's self-aware, and self-awareness is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Without it, we end up performing roles instead of being present. We absorb moods, mirror dysfunctions, and confuse emotional over-availability with love. But when we're centered within, we can discern between what belongs to us and what doesn't. We no longer take things personally. We stop rescuing people from lessons they're meant to learn. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this journey is the practice of silence, not the silence of avoidance or passive aggression, but the silence of presence, a deliberate, grounded quiet that listens more than it speaks, that observes without rushing to intervene, that chooses stillness over unnecessary reaction. In this kind of silence, a woman becomes untouchable, not because she's withdrawn, but because she's anchored. There's something deeply powerful about a woman who doesn't rush to fill the silence in an argument. She doesn't need to be louder to be heard. In relationships, she doesn't over-explain to earn space. Her calm becomes her clarity, and her silence becomes her boundary. Silence offers something no amount of speaking can provide perspective. From a physiological standpoint, silence engages the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest, digestion, and deep insight. When we're reactive, we operate from the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, which narrows our thinking and clouds judgment. But silence restores our access to higher thinking, creativity, and emotional regulation. It gives us space to see things for what they are, not what we fear they might be. Jasmine, a mid-career professional in her 40s, discovered this the hard way. She was used to defending herself in every conversation, trying to be understood by people who had already made up their minds. Every time someone questioned her intentions or minimized her emotions, she would jump in with explanations, justifications, or arguments. It drained her until one day, during a heated moment with her partner, she paused. She said nothing, not out of resignation, but out of awareness. She realized in that instant that her peace was not up for negotiation. The silence that followed was more powerful than any point she could have made. It unsettled him, not because she was trying to hurt him, but because for the first time, she didn't make herself emotionally available for conflict. She remained present, steady, and calm. That moment changed the dynamic of their relationship, not overnight, but permanently. He began to listen. She began to feel less hurt, not because he changed, but because she did. We often believe we must speak more to be seen, but sometimes it's in speaking less that we become visible. Silence isn't the absence of voice. It's the presence of strength. It communicates what words often cannot, that you're no longer afraid to be misunderstood, that you no longer fear disconnection, because you are deeply connected within, that your worth isn't tied to being agreeable, but to being authentic. There's a deep wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, not from fear, but from freedom. Not from suppression, but from sovereignty. When you no longer use words to seek control, you allow life to reveal its truths. People expose themselves in your silence, their intentions surface, their values become visible. You no longer have to investigate or argue, you just observe. And from that place of inner stillness, you make clearer decisions in relationships. This is especially powerful when a woman focuses on herself. As she practices the discipline of silence, she begins to see dynamics previously invisible. She notices how some people only connect through chaos, how others expect emotional labor without reciprocating, how some conversations are power struggles in disguise. And most importantly, she sees her own role in these patterns. This isn't about blame, but about reclaiming responsibility. Every moment of silence becomes a mirror, and what's reflected isn't always comfortable. You might notice patterns of over-explaining, chasing closure, or giving second chances out of loneliness. But by seeing these patterns clearly, you're no longer ruled by them. You begin to act instead of react, and that alone changes everything. This journey doesn't require isolation, but it does demand that you stop abandoning yourself. It invites you to slow down long enough to ask, who am I without the noise? What do I value when I'm not performing? What emotions arise when I'm not distracted? Silence creates space for these questions. It reveals the internal architecture of your life, the values, beliefs, and wounds that shape your relationships. And once seen, they can be healed, rewritten, and aligned. One of the most important realizations a woman can have is this: not everything requires your energy. Not every message needs a response. Not every misunderstanding needs clarification. And not every question deserves an answer. The moment you realize your presence is enough, you begin to conserve your energy for what truly matters. This self-focus isn't a destination. It's a daily practice, a return again and again to the present moment, to the breath, to the truth that you don't have to chase what aligns with you. You attract it by being aligned. And so the silence continues, not as an escape from the world, but as a deeper way of engaging with it, with clarity, discernment, and grace. A woman who focuses on herself and stays silent doesn't disappear. She becomes more visible than ever, not in noise but in essence, and the world cannot help but rearrange around her. A woman who learns to master her emotions isn't just in control. She is free, free from the chains of overreaction, free from the cycles of regret, and free from the grip of patterns that once dictated her responses. Emotional sovereignty isn't about being unfeeling. It's about not being owned by every passing feeling. It's knowing that you can feel deeply and still respond wisely. You can be hurt and still act from alignment. You can feel love, grief, anger, confusion, and still remain grounded in your values. Many people believe emotions are either something to be expressed impulsively or something to be suppressed entirely, but both extremes lead to inner imbalance. One makes you a slave to your reactions, the other disconnects you from yourself. True emotional power lies in the space between impulse and stillness. It is the cultivated ability to feel everything and yet not be consumed by anything. There's a teaching from ancient Eastern traditions that says, control your breath and you control your life. And indeed, modern neuroscience agrees. When a woman pauses and breathes consciously before responding to provocation, her brain shifts from the amygdala, where emotional reactivity is born, to the prefrontal cortex, where logic, reflection, and wisdom reside. This isn't just spiritual advice, it's biological reality. Consider the story of Ea, a woman who for years was known for her fire. When someone crossed a line, she met them with intensity. Her voice rose, her heart raced, she fought back with words proving her intelligence, her sharpness, her refusal to be disrespected. But each time, even when she won the argument, she walked away feeling drained. She realized that her reactions, while justified, were costing her more than the original offense: her peace, her power, her clarity. One day, during a tense conversation with a colleague who had undermined her work in a meeting, she felt the familiar heat rising, the urge to respond immediately, to defend, to correct. But something in her shifted. She inhaled slowly, and instead of reacting, she simply paused, looked at him, and said nothing. That pause, just a few seconds long, wasn't empty. It was full of restraint, full of grounded energy, full of quiet power. In that pause, she realized something: the need to prove yourself is often born from the fear of being unseen. But when you know your worth, you no longer perform for others. You hold it quietly, and the world learns to feel it without being told. The pause gave her time to assess: was this worth her emotional investment? Did this person truly have the power to define her value? No. She answered him with calm, clear boundaries, not from fire, but from foundation. And the result? He backed down. Not because she was aggressive, but because she was anchored. She had stepped into emotional sovereignty. To be emotionally sovereign means your inner state is no longer at the mercy of other people's moods, decisions, or expectations. You stop outsourcing your peace. You stop being available to every emotional tug of war. You don't become cold, you become clear, and this clarity protects you from the trap of reaction. Every time you react without reflection, you give your power away. You let someone else set the rhythm of your nervous system. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you choose, instead of react, you reclaim authorship over your inner world. This is especially vital in intimate relationships, where emotional triggers are most deeply rooted. Partners often mirror each other's wounds. One's insecurity feeds the other's defensiveness. One's silence triggers the other's abandonment. One's need for control collides with the other's need for freedom. Without emotional sovereignty, these dynamics spiral into conflict, misunderstanding, and resentment. But with awareness, they become portals for growth. Sophia, a woman in her late 30s, once described how every argument with her partner would end in her crying, shouting, or walking away in anger. She felt unheard, invalidated, and emotionally exhausted. But as she began a daily practice of breathwork and emotional journaling, something changed. The next time conflict arose, she noticed her body first, the tightening in her chest, the clenching of her jaw, the quickening of her breath. Instead of reacting, she said, "Give me a moment." She stepped away, not to retreat, but to return to herself. She sat, she breathed, and she asked herself not just what she felt, but why she felt it. Was it about him or something deeper? And then, when she returned, she spoke not from the storm, but from the center of it. The conversation that followed was the first they'd had in months that didn't end in emotional chaos. It wasn't perfect, but it was present. Emotional sovereignty isn't achieved by force. It is practiced through daily attention, through the habit of awareness, through the discipline of self-honesty. It is cultivated in quiet moments when no one is watching, where you choose to observe rather than indulge the narrative. You choose to breathe instead of blame, to inquire instead of accuse. And this kind of presence doesn't just benefit your relationships with others, it deepens your relationship with yourself. You begin to trust yourself more. You stop second-guessing every decision. You no longer need to crowdsource your worth or use someone's love as proof of your value. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet assurance, one that says, "I know who I am, I know what I feel, and I will no longer abandon myself for comfort or approval." This leads naturally into another kind of transformation, the power of embodied stillness. Not only does a woman's emotional mastery radiate through her words, or lack of them, but it speaks even more loudly through her presence, through how she moves, how she sits, how she breathes, how she listens, and most importantly, how she holds herself when no one else is holding her. The body is not just a vessel, it is a language. It tells others how to treat you before you speak. Posture, tone, eye contact. These aren't just social cues. They are energetic signatures. They communicate whether you are grounded or scattered, open or guarded, calm or... A woman's powerful presence doesn't require an announcement. It's felt. It's not a presence that demands attention, but one that holds it. This isn't about performing confidence. It's about cultivating inner alignment. Imagine Maya, a soft-spoken woman often overlooked in work meetings. Her ideas were good, but she presented them hesitantly. Eyes down, voice low, shoulders slumped. She didn't realize her body communicated doubt even when her words were clear. After a somatic awareness workshop, she started a new morning routine, 5 minutes barefoot, breathing deeply, rolling her shoulders back, grounding her feet. Over weeks, something shifted. She wasn't trying to be someone else. She was returning to herself, fully inhabiting her body. Her voice became steadier, her presence expanded. The next time she spoke in a meeting, people listened not because she shouted, but because she spoke from her center, and her body confirmed her words. She believed in what she was saying, and so did others. This is the unseen power of embodied stillness. You don't have to yell to be heard or push to be taken seriously. You have to be internally and externally aligned. Breathwork, posture, stillness. These aren't just wellness trends. They're foundational practices for women who want to navigate life with clarity and respect. Breath especially is an often overlooked tool, the bridge between mind and body thought, and action, reaction, and response. In moments of emotional intensity, one deep, intentional breath can change a conversation's trajectory. Conscious breathing rewires the body's stress response, telling your nervous system, I am safe, I am here, I can respond wisely. Over time, this rewiring becomes your default. You're no longer pulled by external chaos. You move from your center, which becomes your compass, especially when others try to drag you into storms you didn't create. Embodied stillness also teaches patience in a world of urgency. A woman who moves slowly, responds thoughtfully, and doesn't rush to fix or explain becomes a mystery, not because she hides herself, but because she reveals only what's aligned. Her yes is clear, her no unwavering, her time sacred. This presence doesn't push people away. It invites truth, creating a relational field where only authenticity survives. People sense when you're present, not just physically, but energetically. They feel safer around you, not because you cater to them, but because you're not at war with yourself. This creates emotional safety in relationships. When your presence is grounded, your partner doesn't feel pressured to guess your mood, manage your triggers, or decode your reactions. You create emotional predictability not by being passive, but by being internally consistent. Children sense this too. An emotionally sovereign embodied mother teaches not by words, but by her being. She models presence in discomfort, pausing in conflict, breathing through overwhelm. This example becomes an inheritance more valuable than any advice. Living this way requires intention. It's not automatic. It must be cultivated. But the reward is immeasurable. Your relationships evolve. Your decisions clarify, your energy deepens. You become a quiet force, not for domination, but for peace, not for attention, but for alignment, not to prove, but to be. In that being, others are moved not by what you do, but by who you are. Because you're no longer reacting to life, you're responding from inner truth, and that truth becomes the most powerful thing in the room. Every woman carries within her a rhythm, an energy, a signal that precedes her words and actions before she speaks, responds, or even enters the room. The transmission is subtle, yet unmistakable. It's her emotional frequency. The truth is, people don't just hear what you say. They feel who you are. The mirror effect teaches us that relationships are reflections. What we carry inside, we project outward. What we avoid internally often manifests externally in the people we attract or repel, in the conflicts we repeat, in the silence we endure, and even in the love we accept. When there's inner disorder, chaos seems to find us no matter how much we run from it. But when there's inner peace, things around us begin to quiet down, not because the world changes, but because our relationship with it transforms. Imagine a woman carrying unresolved grief. She may look composed, even smile in public, but something in her frequency speaks of heaviness. Without realizing it, she attracts emotionally unavailable partners, mirroring back her own disconnect. Or consider a woman filled with self-doubt. She may speak words of affirmation, but her energy subtly communicates hesitation, leading her into dynamics where her boundaries are tested, her voice is overlooked, and her confidence is questioned. This isn't about blame, it's about awakening. The mirror effect isn't punishment, it's revelation. Life keeps showing us through others what we still need to address within. When you begin to center yourself in truth, not performance, not fear, but truth, everything around you becomes clearer, not easier, but clearer. A woman once shared how she kept ending up in relationships where she felt used. Every man she dated seemed charming initially, but would later become cold, controlling, or indifferent. At first she blamed them, then she blamed herself, but after deep reflection, she realized she was operating from a subconscious belief that her worth was transactional, that love had to be earned through effort. She was overgiving, over-explaining, and overextending herself in hopes of receiving scraps of affection. Her energy was saying, "Please see me," even when her words said, "I'm fine." When she stopped trying to fix others and turned inward, things changed. She began to sit in silence more often, to listen to her own breath, to observe her emotional patterns. She didn't try to be liked. She tried to be honest. She didn't rush into intimacy. She watched people slowly. She realized something profound when she became emotionally consistent with herself. People could no longer manipulate her. She stopped attracting chaos. Her stillness began to act as a filter. The mirror effect doesn't just reveal what is broken, it reveals what is possible. When your internal world is ordered, aligned, and nourished, your relationships become reflections of that harmony. It's not magic. It's resonance. We draw people into our lives who vibrate at a similar emotional level. As we raise our own frequency, not by pretending, but by healing, our environment begins to shift. People begin to respect your silence because they can feel it's not empty, it's intentional. They feel your no before you even say it. They feel your joy not because you display it, but because it lives in you. You begin to understand that being centered is the greatest protection you can ever have. It shields you not with walls, but with presence. This is why inner work isn't a luxury, it's the foundation. The woman who invests in her internal world, the one who examines her stories, clears her energy, and returns to herself again and again, builds a life that reflects peace. She no longer begs for connection. She becomes connection. She no longer performs for love. She embodies love. And from that embodiment, she attracts those who are ready to meet her, not just in romance, but in friendship, in family, in community. This inner alignment requires discipline. It means choosing to pause before reacting. It means walking away from what disrupts your peace, even if it's familiar. It means being willing to feel uncomfortable truths rather than escape into distractions. But the reward is clarity. You begin to trust yourself more. When you stop second-guessing your instincts, you no longer tolerate draining energy because you're too aligned with yourself to pretend anymore. Even in solitude, you feel connected because you're generating your own inner strength rather than seeking it externally. That shift is everything. It's the difference between chasing and attracting, between noise and resonance, between being pulled in 1,000 directions and standing firmly in one place. Life has a way of testing this. There will always be people who misunderstand your silence, feel threatened by your presence, or try to pull you back into old patterns. In those moments, you face a choice contract to make others comfortable or expand to remain true to yourself. Sometimes the most powerful move is to pull back, not out of resentment, but out of realignment. This is what we call strategic withdrawal, the conscious decision to step back, observe, and allow the truth to reveal itself through distance, not confrontation. There's a saying, when you stop speaking, people reveal who they are. It's not just poetic, it's a psychological reality. When you stop feeding a dynamic, you expose its core. When you stop explaining yourself, you discover who truly seeks to understand you. When you stop initiating, you find out who values the connection enough to reach for you. Distance has a language, and silence offers its own clarity. Strategic withdrawal isn't about ghosting or playing games. It's about reclaiming your emotional energy from places where it's being wasted. It's about giving yourself space to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. Often we stay too long in situations because we're addicted to potential. We see what someone could be and ignore what they are. But potential isn't a promise, and silence allows us to stop projecting and start perceiving. Amira, a woman in an on-again, off-again relationship for years, finally chose silence, not out of bitterness, but wisdom. She'd tried everything: talks, letters, counseling, compromise, but the cycle continued. Each time she explained her needs, they were acknowledged, but never respected. So one day she stopped explaining. She didn't threaten or argue, she simply became quiet. That silence became her boundary, and in that space, she finally heard her own voice again. Not the anxious voice saying, "Make it work," but the deeper voice saying, "Let it go." Within weeks, the truth of the relationship became undeniable, not because he changed, but because she did. From that clarity, she found peace, Withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It allows energy to recalibrate, reveals who's willing to meet you where you are, filters out the noise so you can hear your intuition, and perhaps most importantly, teaches you that you're not responsible for carrying relationships alone. A woman who knows when to withdraw knows her worth. She's not afraid of being alone because she's not lonely in herself. She doesn't fear silence because silence is where she hears her truth most clearly. She doesn't chase answers because she knows the right questions will always bring the answers in time. There's a powerful shift when you stop forcing outcomes. You begin to trust the unfolding. You begin to notice how much energy you wasted trying to make others see care or stay. And in letting go, you reclaim that energy for your own growth, healing, and joy. Some will call this selfish. Let them. They've never tasted the self-respect that comes from refusing to betray yourself. Others may call you distant, but what they're really feeling is your energetic boundary, the space you now protect like sacred ground. When you withdraw, not as punishment, but as protection, you allow space for clarity to breathe, and clarity guides wise action. It tells you when to stay and when to go. Knowing when to speak and when to be silent teaches you that your presence isn't something to be given freely. It's a gift, a sacred power, and should only be offered where it's appreciated. The woman who practices strategic withdrawal becomes captivating, not because she's mysterious, but because she's complete. People are drawn to her stillness, her integrity, her strength. However, not everyone will be ready for that. And that's perfectly fine, because she no longer lives to be understood by everyone. She lives to be true to herself. From that truth, everything else begins to fall into place. Not always immediately, not always without challenges, but always with purpose. Life supports those who live authentically. It clears paths for the woman brave enough to walk alone when necessary and wise enough to know when to return. This is the silent wisdom that speaks louder than noise, the quiet presence that resonates more powerfully than any performance, and the calm that once chosen never truly leaves. When a woman chooses to focus on herself and embraces silence not as absence but as intention, her life shifts profoundly. This isn't because she forces change, but because she becomes the change. She no longer reacts from old wounds, but responds from inner wisdom. She doesn't plead to be heard. Her stillness speaks for her. She no longer pours herself into things that drain her. She reserves her energy for what aligns with her growth, her peace, and her truth. This journey isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and powerful. She learns to see beyond appearances, to sense the energy behind words, and to walk away from noise disguised as love. Her presence becomes her statement, her boundaries become her protection, and her silence becomes her filter. Gradually, the world around her begins to reflect the world within her. Relationships become more respectful, opportunities arise without seeking them, and clarity replaces confusion. This isn't because she fixed everything around her, but because she mastered what was within. The woman who learns to be still, to be present, to be centered in her own truth, is no longer available for anything less than she deserves. In her silence, everything unnecessary falls away, and in that space, everything meaningful finds its way.